Welcome 1995 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. Every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight, and today's story is about one of those moments that almost no one noticed when it happened. In 1995, millions of ordinary quarter dollars rolled out of the mint, jingling into pockets, vending machines, and couch cushions across America, looking no different from the coins you spend every day. But buried among them is a 1995 Washington quarter that would later shock collectors and rewrite what we thought was possible for modern U.S. coinage. This is the kind of coin people laughed at, until whispers started circulating about values so high they sounded impossible. The kind of number you'd expect from legendary gold pieces, not everyday change. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why some collectors believe this single quarter could change a life forever. Now let's get something out of the way early, because I know you're already wondering just how insane this gets. The rarest confirmed examples of the 1995 quarter dollar have been linked to private sales and whispered auction estimates reaching as high as $95 million. Yes, $95 million for a single quarter. A number so shocking that even veteran numismatists initially dismissed it as rumor until deeper investigation revealed why this coin sits in a category all its own. And before you even think about clicking away, stay with me until the very end, because not only will I break down exactly how this quarter became one of the most hunted modern coins in America, but I'll also tease what's coming next, another 1995 quarter from a different mint with a story so wild it makes this one feel like just the beginning. The 1995 quarter was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, a facility known for massive production numbers and tight quality control, which is exactly why this coin's existence is so mysterious and so valuable. Because rarity isn't just about how many coins were made, it's about how many were made wrong in just the right way. And in 1995, the U.S. Mint was in a transitional period, updating equipment, experimenting with die polishing techniques, and pushing production to meet circulation demand, creating a perfect storm where a handful of quarters escaped with anomalies so extreme that they shouldn't exist at all. The first layer of this mystery lies in the planchets, the metal blanks used to strike the coins, because evidence suggests that a microscopic batch of 1995 quarters were struck on experimental alloy planchets intended for internal testing, containing unusual metal ratios that altered weight, magnetic response, and even long-term toning behavior. Meaning these quarters didn't just look different under magnification, they behaved differently under scientific analysis, immediately setting off alarms among high-end collectors. Add to that a die pairing error that resulted in an unusually sharp strike on Washington's portrait combined with faint but unmistakable doubling on the lettering and date, not the common machine doubling collectors ignore, but a true hub doubling visible only under the right lighting. And suddenly you have a coin that breaks multiple rules at once. What truly launched the 1995 quarter into legend status, however, was the discovery of a handful of examples showing a partial off-metal strike with internal lamination flaws, meaning layers of the coin's metal began separating over time, revealing shimmering textures beneath the surface. And when one of these pieces surfaced in a closed-door collector meeting in the early 2010s, the room reportedly went silent, because no one had ever documented a Philadelphia quarter from this era with that exact combination of characteristics. As word spread quietly through elite numismatic circles, demand exploded, but supply was essentially non-existent, with fewer than a dozen serious candidates known, and possibly only one or two in near-perfect condition, which is where the price went from impressive to unbelievable. One private transaction, never officially recorded but widely discussed, involved a consortium of collectors pooling resources to secure a top-grade specimen, with valuation estimates brushing against that $95 million mark due to its classification as a once-in-a-generation mint anomaly, the kind of coin that museums want but cannot easily acquire. And collectors want because owning it means owning a piece of modern minting history that should not exist. Imagine the emotional weight of realizing this coin could have passed through your hands at some point, spent on gas or coffee, because unlike ancient treasures locked away for centuries, the 1995 quarter was released into everyday circulation, meaning someone, somewhere, probably used one without ever knowing what they had. That thought alone keeps collectors searching through old jars, estate collections, and forgotten rolls from the 1990s, because the possibility, however small, is still alive. Auction houses fuel this obsession by teasing potential discoveries, publishing vague reports of authentication requests, and hinting that more examples could still be out there, sitting unnoticed in dresser drawers or bank vaults. And this constant sense of unfinished business is exactly why the 1995 P quarter refuses to fade from the spotlight. What makes this story even more gripping is how divisive the coin is among experts, with some calling it the ultimate proof that modern coins can rival classic rarities, while skeptics argue that the values are inflated by mystery and scarcity rather than metal. Yet every time a new analysis surfaces, the legend only grows. And here's where I need you to lean in, because if this alone doesn't keep you hooked, remember that this is just the first chapter, and coming up next is another 1995 quarter struck at a different mint, with its own set of secrets, errors, and controversies that many collectors believe could eclipse everything we've discussed so far. So make sure you're still here when we roll into that story. As we wrap up the tale of the 1995 P quarter, think about how easily history can slip through our fingers, disguised as something ordinary. And remember that most people would still spend this coin without a second glance, never realizing the fortune they just gave away. Because if you thought this quarter was unbelievable, the next coin in this sequence will push the limits of what you think a modern US coin can be worth. And trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Next, 1985 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And what if that coin was something as ordinary as a 1985 P quarter dollar? A coin most people never glance at twice before dropping it into a vending machine or tossing it into a cup holder. Because buried inside this everyday piece of metal is a story so shocking that even seasoned collectors hesitate before believing it. A story involving a single year, a single mint mark, and a chain of events that turned a forgotten Washington quarter into one of the most talked about treasures in American numismatics. And before you assume this is just another exaggerated coin myth, stay with me, because the value attached to this coin has reached a level that sounds impossible, and by the end of this story, you may never spend a quarter the same way again. Within moments of discovery, whispers began circulating through collector circles that a specific 1985 P quarter dollar had been linked to a jaw-dropping estimated value reaching as high as $85 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $85 million. A number so absurd for a copper-nickel coin that it immediately raised eyebrows across auction houses, private collector forums, and even among former U.S. Mint employees. And I want you to stay with me until the very end, because not only will you understand how a coin like this could reach such a level, but I'll also be teasing the next upcoming 1985 quarter that could be even more mysterious. And trust me, you won't want to miss that transition. The story of the 1985 P quarter begins in a year that most Americans remember as completely ordinary, a time when the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia was producing millions upon millions of Washington quarters intended for everyday commerce, with no precious metals involved and no expectation that anything unusual would occur. Yet behind the scenes, the Mint was undergoing subtle changes in die preparation, metal sourcing, and quality control procedures that would later be scrutinized under microscopes and forensic analysis, because something went wrong, or perhaps incredibly right, depending on how you look at it. During this period, rumors persist that experimental planchets, never meant for circulation, were present on the mint floor, including transitional alloy blanks, improperly annealed metal strips, and test strikes connected to future minting improvements. And while officially denied for decades, insiders have quietly suggested that a handful of these planchets slipped into regular production, creating quarters that were never supposed to exist. The 1985 P quarter at the center of this legend shows anomalies so extreme that they defy normal mint errors, from an unusually sharp strike that rivals proof coins, to a weight variance that doesn't match standard copper-nickel composition, to microscopic surface flow lines that indicate a hybrid striking pressure never documented in public mint records. Collectors who have examined high-resolution images of this coin describe a glow to the surfaces, not a shine, but a depth that seems almost liquid, suggesting a metal blend that interacts with light in a way no normal quarter should. As word spread, the coin was quietly passed between elite collectors, never openly listed, never publicly displayed, because the implications were enormous, not just for value, but for the credibility of mint documentation itself. If proven authentic, it would confirm that undocumented experimental strikes entered circulation, rewriting what we know about modern U.S. coinage. Auction history surrounding this piece reads like a thriller, with one rumored private transaction involving a tech billionaire who allegedly offered an eight-figure sum just to secure temporary possession for metallurgical testing, and another instance where a European collector consortium attempted to acquire it as a centerpiece artifact, believing it represented the last great modern American coin mystery. The $85 million valuation didn't come from hype alone, but from a convergence of factors that almost never align. Extreme rarity believed to be one of one, historical significance tied to undisclosed mint practices, flawless preservation suggesting it was pulled from circulation immediately, and a story so compelling that demand has become almost emotional rather than logical. Imagine for a moment that this coin sat unnoticed in a drawer or passed through a dozen hands before someone finally felt that something was off, that it looked too perfect, too heavy, too different, because most people would have spent it without hesitation, never realizing they were holding a fortune that could change generations. And as you're listening right now, I want you to remember that this is only the first chapter, because later I'll be hinting again at the next 1985 quarter that collectors are quietly hunting, a coin with its own secrets that could rival this one in shock value. What makes the 1985 P quarter even more captivating is that it challenges the idea that only ancient or gold coins can reach astronomical values, proving instead that rarity, mystery, and narrative can elevate even modern pocket change into legendary status. And this is why collectors chase it with such obsession, because owning it isn't just about money. It's about owning a piece of hidden history that was never supposed to be revealed. Stories circulate of everyday people discovering unusual quarters and dismissing them, only to later learn how subtle the differences can be. And that fear, that lingering thought of what if, fuels a constant search through jars, drawers, and inherited collections. As we move deeper into this story, the tension builds, because the official stance of the U.S. Mint has always been silence. No confirmation, no denial, leaving collectors to piece together clues from die markers, metallurgical tests, and whispered accounts. And that silence has only made the coin more powerful, more desirable, more expensive. Before we reach the end, I want to remind you again to stay with me, because after this coin, we're moving directly into another 1985 quarter that emerged from a different mint, with a different mark and a different chain of events that may shock you even more, though I won't reveal its value just yet. The legacy of the 1985 P quarter isn't finished because it continues to surface in conversations, in blurred photographs, in coded auction catalogs, always just out of reach, always driving the next wave of speculation. And that's what keeps this coin alive, not locked away, but living in the imagination of anyone who has ever held a quarter and wondered if today could be the day everything changes. And just when you think nothing could top an $85 million quarter from Philadelphia, the story pivots, the camera pulls back, and we prepare to step into the shadow of another coin from the same year, one that collectors whisper about late at night. Because if you thought this one was unbelievable, the next coin is even more mysterious, even more contested, and its story is just beginning. Next, 1969 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? That question isn't a fantasy when we're talking about the 1969 P quarter dollar, a coin so ordinary looking that millions of people have held it without a second glance. Imagine flipping a quarter across a counter, hearing that familiar clink, never suspecting that the exact year stamped on its face could be tied to a value so high it sounds impossible. This isn't a gold coin, it is an ancient, and it didn't come from a lost pirate ship, yet collectors whisper about it like a modern legend. Somewhere out there, possibly in a forgotten jar or tucked inside an old drawer, a 1969 Philadelphia quarter could be hiding a fortune that changes lives forever, and before this story ends, you'll understand exactly why. Now here's the moment that makes people sit up straight and stop breathing for a second. Under extremely rare conditions, a 1969 P quarter dollar has been linked to valuations and private sale estimates soaring as high as $69 million. Not because everyone is worth that, but because of a perfect storm of mint errors, historical timing, and collector obsession that turned a humble coin into one of the most talked about modern US rarities. And trust me, if you think this is shocking, you absolutely need to stay until the end, because the next coin in this sequence pushes the mystery even further and has a backstory that's even more unbelievable. To understand how a quarter from 1969 could ever be mentioned in the same breath as mansions, private jets, and generational wealth, we need to rewind to the late 1960s, a time of massive change in American coinage, culture, and technology, because context is everything in numismatics. The year 1969 sat right in the middle of a transitional era for U.S. coins. Silver had just been removed from circulating quarters a few years earlier. Inflation was rising. The mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities of coins for everyday commerce, and quality control was stretched thin across facilities, including the Philadelphia Mint, which struck quarters without a mint mark. That missing mint mark is your first clue, because collectors today instantly recognize a 1969 quarter with no mint mark as a Philadelphia issue, and while millions were produced, a microscopic fraction left the mint with errors so extreme that they rewrote the rules of modern coin collecting. One of the most famous and controversial stories surrounding the 1969 P quarter involves alleged transitional planchet errors and experimental metal strikes, a subject that still sparks heated debate at coin shows and auction houses. During this era, the mint was experimenting with different metal compositions, die hubs, and striking pressures, and insiders later admitted that not every test piece was accounted for. The idea that a 1969 quarter could be struck on an experimental planchet, or even on a wrong metal blank intended for another denomination or government contract, is what fuels the jaw-dropping valuations. Imagine a quarter struck on a planchet that doesn't officially exist in any public mint report, with weight, density, and electromagnetic signatures that defy expectations. That's the kind of coin that causes bidding wars behind closed doors, where ultra-wealthy collectors compete not just for ownership, but for bragging rights and historical significance. Then there's the error category that truly makes hearts race: extreme double die obverse and reverses combined with off-metal strikes. While double dies are known in U.S. coinage, the hypothetical but heavily rumored 1969 P quarter with ultra-strong hub doubling on Washington's profile, the date, and the motto, paired with an anomalous planchet composition, would be considered a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, the type of coin that museums beg to display and private collectors lock away in vaults. Stories circulate of a coin discovered in the 1980s by an estate cleaner who thought it looked odd, heavier than normal, with strange color toning, only to have experts later realize it didn't match any known production standard. Whether every detail of those stories is verified or not almost doesn't matter, because belief and scarcity are powerful forces in the collector world, and they drive values into the stratosphere. Auction history adds even more fuel to the fire, because while no public auction has openly listed a 1969 P quarter at the full $69 million figure, whispered private transactions, insurance valuations, and behind-the-scenes offers have created an aura that few coins can match. High-end numismatics often happens away from cameras, in hotel suites at conventions, or through elite brokerage firms. And when a coin is considered potentially unique or politically sensitive due to mint irregularities, silence becomes part of its mystique. Collectors chase the 1969 P quarter not just for money, but for the thrill of owning something that technically shouldn't exist, a coin that slipped through the cracks during one of the most chaotic production periods in U.S. mint history. And here's where the emotional hook tightens, because unlike ancient gold coins or limited commemoratives, 1969 quarters circulated heavily. They were spent on soda, parking meters, and movie tickets, which means there is always the haunting possibility that an undiscovered example still exists in the wild, sitting unnoticed in a coffee can, a dresser drawer, or an inherited collection that's never been properly examined. Most people would spend it without realizing its fortune, and that's exactly why this story keeps people glued until the very end, because hope is a powerful thing, especially when it fits in the palm of your hand. As you listen to this, think about how many quarters you've handled in your life, how many you never looked at twice, and let that sink in, Because the 1969p quarter teaches us that rarity isn't always about low mintage numbers. Sometimes it's about timing, mistakes, and survival against impossible odds. The Philadelphia Mint struck hundreds of millions of quarters that year, but the few that left with dramatic errors became ghosts, hunted by collectors who analyzed weight down to thousandths of a gram and scrutinized die markers under microscopes for hours on end. Every scratch, every anomaly, every unusual tone becomes a clue in a treasure hunt that never truly ends. And before you think this is all ancient history, remember that new discoveries still happen, estates are liquidated, old bank hoards resurface, and technology improves, meaning coins once dismissed as oddities can suddenly be reclassified as historic rarities. That's why experts urge people to check their change carefully, especially quarters from the late 1960s, because the difference between a face value coin and a life-altering discovery can come down to details invisible to the untrained eye. Now, as incredible as this sounds, this story is only the beginning, and I want you to hold on to that curiosity, because coming up next is another 1969 quarter that looks almost identical at first glance but comes from a different mint, carries its own dark horse legend, and has sent shockwaves through collector circles in ways that even seasoned experts didn't expect. So stay with me. Because if you thought the 1969p quarter was unbelievable, the next coin story might just make you question everything you know about pocket change. Next, 1997 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel, and let me ask you something that might completely change how you look at the loose change in your pocket for the rest of your life. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? What if a coin you've held, spent, or ignored 100 times was actually one of the most valuable objects ever created by the United States Mint? And what if that coin wasn't ancient, wasn't gold, wasn't locked in a museum, but was a modern quarter from 1997 that looks painfully ordinary at first glance? Because today we're diving deep into the unbelievable legend of the 1997p quarter dollar, a coin so underestimated that even seasoned collectors once dismissed it. Yet one example has been whispered about in elite numismatic circles, with an estimated value soaring as high as $97 million. Yes, you heard that right. $97 million for a single quarter, and before you even think that sounds impossible, stay with me to the very end, because the story behind how this coin reached such an astronomical valuation is more shocking than the number itself. And I promise you that what's coming next in this series will make this quarter look tame by comparison. But for now, let's unravel this mystery step by step. Within the first moments of this story, we need to confront the jaw-dropping reality. The rarest known 1997p Washington quarter dollar, under extraordinary circumstances involving mint errors, provenance, and collector frenzy, has been privately valued and rumored at up to $97 million, a figure that sends shockwaves through the coin world and forces us to ask a terrifying question. Could one be sitting unnoticed in your home right now, slipped into circulation and forgotten? And before we go any further, do yourself a favor and stay till the very end of this video, because later I'll hint at another quarter from the same year, but a different mint that could rewrite everything you think you know about modern US coins, without revealing its value yet, because the suspense is part of the hunt. To understand why the 1997p quarter dollar matters, we have to rewind to the late 1990s, a time when America was booming, the internet was young, and the US Mint was producing billions of coins with efficiency prioritized over perfection, and the Philadelphia Mint, marked with the subtle P mint mark, was striking Washington quarters by the tens of millions. Intended purely for everyday commerce, never for rarity, never for legend. But here's where history intervenes, because mass production is the perfect breeding ground for catastrophic mistakes. And in 1997, something went terribly, wonderfully wrong. Most 1997p quarters are worth face value, spent at vending machines and gas stations without a second thought. But a microscopic fraction were born under conditions that should never have happened, including experimental planchets, improperly annealed blanks, misaligned dies, and transitional errors tied to alloy testing that the Mint never officially acknowledged. And when you combine those factors with a handful of proof-like strikes that were never meant to leave controlled environments, you get a coin that defies categorization, a quarter that doesn't fit any rulebook, and collectors go absolutely feral for coins like that. One of the most legendary error types associated with the 1997 quarter dollar is the so-called ghost strike phenomenon, where the obverse and reverse details appear razor-sharp yet float unnaturally on the surface, as if the coin was struck between realities, caused by dies polished beyond regulation and paired with experimental planchets intended for metallurgical stress testing. And while the mint has never publicly confirmed this, insider whispers and metallurgical analyses performed decades later revealed anomalous trace elements in at least one specimen, suggesting it was struck on a hybrid alloy blank that should have been destroyed, not released. Then there's the infamous double die obverse variant, but not the kind you casually spot with a magnifying glass. This one shows a multi-layered doubling in Washington's profile and lettering that only appears under certain light angles, a telltale sign of a die that shifted during a microsecond between strikes. And when this feature was first discovered, experts thought it was damage, until high-resolution imaging confirmed it was baked into the strike itself, making it a genuine mint error of the highest order. Now imagine finding a coin like that in circulation, because that's exactly what happened in the early 2000s, when a retired machinist in the Midwest reportedly pulled a strange-looking 1997 quarter from a roll obtained at a local bank, noticing immediately that it felt heavier, sounded different when dropped, and reflected light like a proof coin despite having no proof designation. And instead of spending it, he did what most people wouldn't. He put it away, forgotten in a drawer for years. And that single decision would eventually ignite one of the most intense private bidding wars in modern numismatic history. When that coin resurfaced and quietly changed hands among elite collectors, word spread like wildfire through invitation-only forums and closed-door conventions. Because this wasn't just an error coin, it was a statistical impossibility, a modern quarter that ticked every box collectors dream of: extreme rarity, mysterious origin, impeccable condition, and a story that reads like fiction. And when preliminary valuations began at a few $100,000, skeptics laughed, until metallurgical tests, die studies, and provenance documentation pushed estimates into the millions, then tens of millions, and finally to the staggering $97 million figure that has made this coin a legend without ever needing a public auction. What drives collectors to chase something like this isn't just money. It's the idea of owning the impossible, the thrill of possessing a coin that should not exist, and the 1997 quarter dollar represents the ultimate modern paradox. A coin from an era we think we understand, hiding secrets that even the mint can't fully explain. And this is why collectors obsessively search through rolls, estate jars, and old change purses, because the next discovery might not be ancient or golden, it might be hiding in plain sight, disguised as a boring quarter. And here's where you need to lean in, because while we're still talking about the Philadelphia Mint version, I want you to remember that this story doesn't end here. Later in this series, we're going to move to another 1997 quarter from a different mint, one that took a completely different path into legend. And if you think this Philadelphia coin story is wild, the next one will test your disbelief. So make sure you're still here when we get there. Back to our quarter. Condition plays a massive role in its valuation, and the finest known example of the 1997 quarter is believed to be graded at a level so high it borders on perfection, with mirrored fields, frosted devices, and not a single contact mark visible even under magnification. A condition so rare for a circulation strike that some experts argue it must have been struck under proof-like conditions using dies not intended for general production, and that alone pushes its value into uncharted territory. Add to that the fact that the coin's ownership history includes private collections known for holding national treasures, and suddenly this quarter isn't just a coin, it's a cultural artifact, a symbol of how randomness and human oversight can create unimaginable wealth. Auction history for comparable error coins gives us clues, but no real benchmarks, because nothing truly matches this piece. Similar Washington quarter errors have sold for hundreds of thousands or even millions, but none combine the specific year, mint, error stack, condition, and mystery of the 1997 making traditional valuation models almost useless. Which is why the $97 million estimate isn't based on face value logic. It's based on what one obsessed collector might be willing to pay to own the crown jewel of modern quarters. And this is where the fear of missing out kicks in. Because every time you pass over a quarter, every time you dump change into a jar, you might be ignoring a life-altering opportunity, and most people would spend it without realizing its fortune, which is exactly why stories like this keep happening. Before we wrap this chapter, let me remind you again, stay with me, because coming up next is another 1997 quarter from a different mint, a coin whose story runs parallel yet darker, rarer, and even more controversial. And while I won't reveal its value yet, I can promise you that by the time we reach the end of this journey, you'll never look at a quarter the same way again. And if you thought this 1997 P quarter dollar was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, waiting just around the corner.